Hi everyone. Today we're going to do a tutorial on how we pass various variables from one view controller into another. So say for example you have one screen on your app and you fire up another screen. How do you pass variables between the two? So to get started, open up Xamarin, create a new solution under iOS Universal and call it something useful like passing variables. And we're going to choose one of these options, which will be a single view application. So click OK. Okay, once it's loaded, you'll notice we have the usual files in our folders here, and just close app delegate. And what we're going to work with are the view controllers. So you'll notice there's only one view controller, which is the passing variables view controller. If you open that, you get much the same as I've shown you in other tutorials. We get our viewDidLoad method, and this is typically where we start adding stuff. So we're just going to add a single button to this. So we're going to say var button equals new UI button, and we're going to give it a frame, core graphics CG rect, and we're just going to put this right in the middle. So we're going to say, we won't put it in the middle, let's keep it simple. Let's have it 50 from the edge, 100 from the top, and it's going to be 150 wide and 50 high. And then just close that up. And then of course we have to give it some text. So we say button.setTitle, and we're going to call this Open VC, which stands for View Controller. And you'll notice the yellow section here is asking for another variable, which is the control state. So it says, when I assign this title, what am I going to make the state of the button? And we simply say normal. UI control state.normal. There we go. And then let's add that button to our view. Just like that. Okay, let's run that in an emulator. And now that the emulator is loaded up, you'll notice there's nothing there. And that's because iOS likes to make your buttons white by default. And if you have a white background, you won't be able to see it. So stop your debugging and let's set some sort of color here. Let's set a background color equals to UI color dot, and then pick any color. Let's make it a nice garish red. So let's run that and see what we get. There we go, now it's shown up. So now I can click the button and nothing happens, which is a bit bizarre. So let's go back to Xamarin, stop that. And we need to tell it that when I touch the button, I want you to do something. So we say button dot touch up inside is equal to, and then just click the default, open your curly brace, close your curly brace. And then between those curly braces, we give it some sort of event that we're going to define later. So let's save that. Okay, so we have one view controller, and how do we open up a second one? Well, first of all, there are loads of different ways of doing this, but I'm just going to show you one in this tutorial, which is probably the most common one you'll come across. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to my storyboard file here. And you'll notice there are two, one for iPad and one for iPhone. So open up your iPhone storyboard file, which normally takes quite a while, even though there's nothing in our project really. And just whilst that's loading, storyboard is just a way of graphically designing your app. And as you get more and more advanced, you'll start to move away from the storyboards and you'll do everything programmatically, because you have much more control programmatically. But starting out, definitely stick with storyboards. So let's look at some properties of this view controller. Click the grey bar at the bottom of it, and then go over to the sidebar where it says properties. I'm just going to make this stick here by clicking this dock icon. And you'll notice here it says class passing variables view controller. And if you go back here for our view controller, that's exactly what it's called. So that's how you link whatever's in your storyboard to your view controller. So we're just going to load another view controller into our storyboard. And we do that by clicking our toolbox and view controller, and then just pop it anywhere in your view. And then click the grey area, and of course we have to give this view controller a name. So we're just going to call this second view controller. There we go. And as soon as you give that a class, you'll notice over here it pops up with a CS file. Okay, something you need to be aware of is that when you're calling view controllers in your code, sometimes they refer to this, the storyboard ID, which isn't always set, and this always traps a lot of beginners because you'll get a massive error and you'll say, why am I getting an error? Because I've already defined my class. But really it's because you haven't defined this ID. So call this again second view controller and hit enter. Right, so save that. And so we have two view controllers now. So how do we transition between the two? Well, the first thing we're going to do is set some content inside our second view controller. So when it loads, we know that it's actually loaded. Because at the moment, it's just a white screen. So open it up, and you'll see you have your base class here, which inherits from UIViewController. Go back to your passing variables view controller, and just copy, delete that. Just copy your view did load section. And then pop it in. There we go. And change your button color to blue. And change your button title to open first, just so we know where we are. Save that. And then come back to your passing variables view controller. And where the magic's going to happen is in this touch up inside event. And in here we're going to say, I'm going to give you a new view controller and I want you to put this on top of the view controller we have at the moment. Okay, to do that, we have to tell it what this new view controller is. So we're going to say, because our class is called second view controller, which should come up there, and we're going to call this controller is equal to this dot storyboard, because we want to refer to the storyboard that refers to this whole project, and it will choose either iPad or iPhone depending on which project you're running. And then we're going to get the instantiate view controller method, and this will take one argument, which is the name of your view controller. And this is where I said if you go to your storyboard and you click the grey bar, the storyboard ID is what it's looking for. So over here you have to name it exactly the same as your storyboard ID. So second view controller. And just close your brackets and then type as, and we want to type second view controller. And don't forget your semicolon at the end. And save that. I'm just going to create a bit of space here and go to a new line. Now we have to tell it how to show this view controller. So we type this dot navigation controller dot push view controller, and we type our controller variable, and we say if we want it animated or not, which I do, so I say true, and I put a semicolon. So let's run that in the emulator and see what happens. In theory, when I press the button, it should open up a new view controller. But it doesn't. It throws some massive exception. Now this is a very annoying bug I found lately with Xamarin, and it frustrated me for ages until I figured out what it was. And here it says UI storyboard doesn't contain a view controller with identifier second view controller, but it does because we've set it. And where that's going wrong, if you just stop that, is you right click your storyboard, click open with some sort of text program. I'm just going to make this larger so we can see it. Oh, too small. And if you look down here, it lays out your view controllers. So all your storyboard is a basic text file that lays out all of your variables inside your view controllers. And what we're going to look for is a very specific part. So we want to find our second view controller declaration, which is here. And we're just going to look through a couple of these lines because I can't quite remember where it is now. But I will in a second when I see it. It's here. So over here where it says explicit storyboard identifier equals something, it's gone wrong. And I don't know what the bug is, but I hope they fix it soon. You have to delete explicit and just type storyboard identifier with a small s at the beginning. And save that. Quit your text program. And now when I click play, let's load it up into the emulator. And see what happens when I hit the button. So I've clicked it. Now I have a major error. Object reference not set to an instance of an object. Now I've done this deliberately to show you guys that you need an extra feature inside your storyboard. So go ahead and click stop and go to your storyboard. So there's one thing missing from this picture, and that's something called a navigation controller. Now a navigation controller is just the way that iOS keeps track of all of the view controllers. So the view controllers are just something that iOS, it's like an object, and iOS says, I'm going to present this one. And then you say to it, I want you to show the person another view controller. So it takes that view controller and says to the navigation controller, I want you to present this. So the navigation controller keeps a general overview of all of the view controllers you have in the system at any one time. It's kind of like the general of the army. So your view controllers are your soldiers, and your navigation controller is the general, and it tells all of the view controllers what to do and when. So let's drag navigation controller into our view. And the first thing you'll notice is that it's brought its own view controller with it. So click the grey bar and simply remove that one. And then click your navigation controller, hold down the control button and drag across to your first view controller and release. And it will ask you what the relationship is. And because the first view controller is the one we want to see when we load up the app, we define it as root. So click root and you'll see you get a squiggly line that goes up to your view controller. But also, we still have this little section here that says load up this view controller as the first thing people see. We don't want that. We want it to load up the navigation controller, which will then load up the view controller. So to do that, click the grey bar of your navigation controller, and over here in your properties, click is initial view controller. Now you'll notice the little app entry point has started here, which goes into your controller, which then goes into your view controller. And you can move all of this around to make it more neat if you like. That's what I'm going to do. Move it up here, zoom it out a bit, so you can see much easier what's going on. There we go. So save that, and then just double check your storyboard file for that annoying bug. Go to your text edit, and you'll notice here in second view controller, it's again changed it to explicit storyboard. So we're just going to fix that again and save it, quit it. So it seems like every time you make a change inside your storyboard file, you might have to change it in the text file. But thankfully, that's not very often. So now we're going to click play. And let's see what it does in our emulator. Here we go. So now when I click the button, it opens up the second view controller, which has the button called Open First. And you'll notice at the top, it's introduced this bar, which should look very familiar if you have an iDevice. And basically this says, simply go back to the previous view controller. Now all of this, remember, is being taken care of by the navigation controller. So it knows that the previous view controller is called Title, and the one we're on now is this one. So if I click the back button, it simply goes back. And you can go between the two as much as you like. Now just for completeness, we're going to go into the second view controller. And if you recall, I said paste all of your button code. And in here, we're going to tell it to open the first view controller. So let me just get rid of this. There we go. And make this a little smaller again. And just copy this code over to your second view controller and paste. But we're going to call this one the name of the first view controller, which is passing variables. Passing variables view controller. There we go. So just copy that, and everywhere you see second view controller, just paste it in. There we go. And save that. Now again, if you go to your storyboard, click your first view controller, which is called passing variables. So over here in properties, we look down here, and you'll notice there's no storyboard ID. So if you use that, it's going to give you an error. So of course, we have to name it passing variables view controller. There we go. Save that. And again, check for the very annoying bug. Open with text. And there it is. Save that. And run it in the emulator. So now, as before, when I click this button, it opens a new view controller. And then I'm going to click this one, and it's going to open the first view controller. Or it's going to give me an error. And it says, your storyboard doesn't contain a view controller with this identifier, passing variables view controller. So go over to your storyboard, double check that your ID is correct, which it appears to be. And guess what? Let's open up this text file again. And you'll notice it's changed this one to explicit. So we'll change that back to storyboard and quit that. And we will run our app again. So I'll click the first button and open the second view controller. Then I'll click this button and it opens the first one again. But you will notice if I press back, it goes to the view controller that was there before and then the very first one. So every time I'm opening a new view controller, it's adding it to a stack. And the navigation controller is keeping track of that stack. So it's added 1, it's added 2, it's added 3, it's added 4, which means I have to click back a few times to get back to my original screen. So back, 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 4 times. So be aware of that when you're creating your apps, because users don't want to click through back more than once. So let's stop that emulator running. Right, so the second part of this tutorial will be very quick, and it was inspired by an email I got from a fellow over in Italy, I think, and he wanted to know, how do I pass variables from one view controller to the other? So to do that, let's go to our second view controller, and let's say in here we want to pass a variable over. For example, we want to pass the variable of our button's title. So the first thing we do is create a class variable, and we will just call this string button title, and we will set it as a getter setter. There we go. Okay, and up here in our constructor method, this is simply called every time we say we want a new instance of this class. We're going to set that button title, and we will say, actually we won't, we're going to do it slightly differently. We're just going to leave it as this, string button title get set. But we're going to make this public. Now all public does is say that any other class that's accessing this variable can change it. And that's what get set means. And if you're interested in that kind of thing, you should look up sort of access modifiers. There's plenty of tutorials out on Google, and it'll tell you everything you need to know about this, private and public, and the get set thing. Okay. Now, we need to put that button title into this set title, so get rid of this stuff in quotes and just say button title. There we go. Now we're just going to run that because I'm going to show you that it's going to throw you an error. And this is a very common error that you have to watch out for in programming absolutely anything. So when I click to open my second view controller, I've got nothing in my title. So stop that emulator. And that's because over here, I've simply said I have a string called button title, but I haven't given it a value. Now, you're very lucky in this case because there was no horrible error thrown, which would have crashed an app. Most times when you do this kind of error, you will crash your app. But this button method is quite tolerant, so you're okay. So when we construct our class, we're just going to give it a placeholder just to make sure it's got something. So we say button title equals test. Okay. Now, the magic trick of passing variables between view controllers is over here in our first view controller, where we instantiate the second view controller. We're just going to put a line here, and we're going to do something before we push it. And because you've instantiated it, you can now start to call various methods and variables inside it. So coming back to your first view controller, we're going to say controller dot. Now we have some options, and I'm just going to type button, and you'll notice we can set the button title from this point equals to passed. There we go. So I'm going to save that. So what's happening here, just to give you an overview, is when you create your second view controller, it comes over here, it creates this whole instance of the class, it sets a button title, it goes here and makes that button title test. Then we come to our second line and we say, I want you to get that button title and change it to passed. And all of this happens before we see anything. Once you've done that, you then push your view controller on top. And technically, well, in theory, your button should then appear as passed. So I'm going to open it, and there we have our button as passed. Back. There we go. So I'm just going to stop that. And to answer the guy's email that sent me one, he wants to pass a name and password between view controllers. So all he would have to do is actually, let's do this quickly, is go here, pass it here, and I'm going to call this name and password. Okay, and then I'm going to just give them a holder value so we don't get any null reference errors. You can make it empty, that's fine. Password equals, actually let's call it not set, so we know not set. There we go. So we're just going to pass over the name and password. So we say controller dot name equals Grant because that's my name, and then controller dot password equals password. Just so you know, that's not my password, so you can't hack my YouTube or Facebook accounts. And then we're going to do something with those variables. So over here in view.did_load, we are going to say, instead of opening up a new view controller when we press the button, I'm going to create an alert view. New UI alert view. And we're going to give it the title of name. We're going to give it a message of password equals, and then plus password. I'm going to give it a delegate, which is null in this case, and give it a button that says OK, and null. And then dot show to actually show it. So when I click the button, it'll tell me what my name and password are. So let's click play. And let's open it. And so we have this button and we passed this word passed. And when I click it, it should show me my passed variables. So Grant and password equals password. There we go. I hope you found that helpful. And as usual, if you have any questions, then just type them down in the comments and I may make a video about them. Thanks for listening.